Today on the podcast, we're sharing stories of real marriage boundaries that helped couples to grow their marriage healthier. Our goal with sharing these stories is to help you see ways that boundaries can be approachable and doable for your marriage. So before we jump into this conversation, I am so excited to let you know we have an awesome resource to go with this conversation, our brand new Boundaries Workbook. This workbook is a simple guide to boundary setting for marriage, and you can find it at awesomemarriage.com or in today's show notes. So that's going to be a great practical tool to help you put this stuff into place, bring it out of the clouds, demystify it, and get it into action. So, Dr. Kim, we're going to jump in talking about real marriage boundaries. Do you have any examples of boundaries that have helped you and Nancy in your marriage?
Yeah, I thought of two or three that I think have been really good for us. And the first one really happened pretty easy early in marriage. And that was when we decided what we're going to do with our finances. And I think, because that's something I see a lot of couples struggle with.
Mm-hmm.
And I also know that couples that get married later in life, or maybe a second marriage, and the whole idea of combining into one account seems scary to them. But we were both 20 and we were both broke. I mean, we didn't have any money. So it made pretty much sense that we have one account. I don't think we had enough money that we could open two accounts. So we just opened one account. And then I think the idea of that and beginning to see the boundary of a budget and what that it was really something that would help us and not hinder us in any way. We made the commitment, finances, we're not going to go into debt. And then we help us all that to begin to see that everything really was his and we were just to manage it. And I think those two things of setting a budget, saying we're not going to debt, setting up things for where we could spend. We always put something in there for time together, dates and stuff. We also put time in there for each one of us to have money to spend at our discretion. So if Nancy wanted to buy something and it was in that range, that, and me the same way, we didn't have to check with each other. And then we couldn't comment because she bought something that she thought looked good on the shelf. And I thought, oh, why did you buy that? I couldn't say that because we had given each other that freedom. So I think those are some things that really, really helped. I think another thing was that just in resolving conflict, that we figured out that we resolved it differently, that Nancy always liked to talk about things pretty quickly and get it over with so she could move on. I like to have a little more time to process. And so that was causing some problems. So our boundary was that I could use a timeout if I need to think about things longer, but that I had to set the time to get back together and had to be, no more than 24 hours, that I couldn't just say, hey, we'll talk about this later and then bring it back up again. That if I said, we're going to talk about it later, I need some time to pray and think through this. They also said when we're going to get back together. So that was the boundary that I had to set that. So there's a couple things that I thought of that I think we did that really were helpful in a lot of ways in areas that a lot of couples have troubles on. And one's finance, and one is, how do we resolve conflict, and when do we do that, and how do we talk through things?
Gosh, those are so good. Yeah. So when you were setting those, I mean, we talk about boundaries, how they have to be enforceable. So when you were kind of starting with that process, how did you work that out between you two? Were there any bumps along the way to making it something you both agreed on? How did you work that out?
Yeah, I think on the finances, I think the fact that we were just kind of starting out. Now, we had both, like Nancy had, both of us did not work during college. And so our parents had helped us with that. And so we kind of had learned to do kind of a budget anyway, because we knew there's only so much money that we had each month and that kind of stuff. So we'd already both kind of gotten into that. So I think it made sense for us to kind of carry that over into our marriage. So I think that the enforcing it was really just looking at our budget over month. How do we do? Are we doing things? And just continuing to let that develop, make changes where it need to be developed. Maybe we put X number of month in groceries, and we found that we weren't spending that much. So we've got X number of dollars here to put something else. So I think that the accountability there was just continuing to work on the budget consistently. And then I think as far as resolving tough issues, it was like if I didn't come back and talk about it, that accountability was I had to do that.
Mhm.
And I don't think after that, I really don't think I ever didn't come back. I was really
Mhm.
good at before we set that boundary of saying I'd come back and then just I hope she forgets about
Yeah.
this. You
Yeah.
know?
Did she? Did she
And
ever
no,
forget?
no,
No.
no. So finally I
No.
thought, well, it's pretty good. I need to come back and do that. So I think they were self-imposed. I don't because I really don't remember Nancy ever coming and saying, "Hey, you haven't come back. It's been
Mhm.
2 weeks and whatever." That we were pretty good about that
Mhm.
once we began that.
Yeah, that's awesome. So how do you feel like those have shaped and changed your relationship?
I think it helped us early on one to realize that we were together on this. It wasn't like
Mm.
it was a boundary to punish somebody or
Mhm.
to restrict somebody. It was a boundary that we put in place that we felt was good in our marriage relationship. Another thing I thought of was just in the early years of our marriage, I was really active in a lot of things,
Mhm.
just kind of getting your name out and all that kind of stuff. I was on boards, committees, and a lot of those had night meetings, and that worked out pretty good because we had before kids because we had a lot of time together and we had some
Mhm.
flexibility in that. It really wasn't an issue. But once we had kids, that I needed to be home more. And I remember one week I'd been out every night, Monday,
Mm.
probably Sunday through Thursday. And we just sat down and I said, I don't like this. And she said, I'm
Mhm.
glad you brought it up because I was getting ready to bring it up. This is too much. And so
Mm.
what I decided was at that point in our culture, in our life, I was not going to have one night meeting a week at
Mhm.
the maximum. And then really over probably the next year, as I eased off of boards and stuff, I just finally said, I'm going to do night meetings. I'm just not. If it's something that requires night meetings, it's too important for me to be home, to be there with Nancy, to help with the kids. And I just
Mhm.
made that decision not to do that because, the thing that I've said before is when I said yes to something outside of the family, I was saying no to my family, and
Mhm.
and I didn't want to do that. And so I think that was the boundary was that I wasn't going to do night meetings, to
Mhm.
work toward that. And I think there were a couple times I remember that someone asked me to do something or be on a board or do something, and I would talk to Nancy, and she would say, "Yeah, but remember, we made that
Mm.
decision. When are the meetings? Well, they're at night, but they're just once a quarter,
Right.
you know."
Right.
And but doesn't that go against what we said? And I said, yeah. So that was kind of the
Mhm.
accountability in that one
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
sure. And I loved it.
Mhm.
I don't like to do things at night. Even still, even with the kids gone, I still want to be flexible for grandkids or just
Mhm.
extra time with Nancy or whatever with that. And so if it relates to one of my adult kids or grandkids, sure, because usually we're both involved in doing
Mhm.
something at night with them. Like we had a baseball game last night for my grandson is a sophomore, and so things like that. But otherwise, I just don't do it. And I know that's not a right or wrong. It's not something that someone else has to do or doesn't have to
Mhm.
do. But I think you've got to work that out and never let things um, get in the way of what needs to happen in your family and with your spouse.
Mhm. Yeah, those are good because it's those little things. And I think that's why the boundaries are so important to talk about and why I love that we're talking about it because it's so easy to let a couple of those little once a quarter things in. And before you know it, your schedule has just been hijacked. And you're like, how did that happen to me? What happened?
Yes,
We
right,
said we weren't going to
exactly.
get busy, and then you do.
Exactly. And I think you don't, and I really had trouble at that time, and I still have trouble at times saying no to
Mm-hmm.
people.
Mm-hmm.
I felt, well, that was nice that they asked me. I felt
Mm-hmm.
honored that someone asked me, and then how can I say no to them? And it just took me a while to work through that and realize it was
Mm-hmm.
okay to say no.
Mm-hmm.
I never had anybody give me a hard time for saying no.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like they went into some big deal because I said no. They
Yeah.
respected it.
Yeah.
And usually I just would tell them the truth. It was like, I've chosen not to do this in this stage of my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
So,
so good. Yeah, I think those time boundaries. I think one of the ones I think has really shaped our marriage is that since Brian's a pastor, he works on Sunday. That's a really big day for him, really full day.
sure.
And we're not in a large church. Our church is a small church, and it still is just as big. We've been in a bigger church context before. It's a huge event on Sunday, no matter where you are. It's a big day, a lot of prep, a lot of energy going into that. And so Sunday is not a day off for
Right.
either of us. And so even if I'm not doing something, I don't consider that to be a day off. It's a day where I'm available, I'm on, I'm often serving. Sometimes I'm not. And sometimes I'll just use it as a day to do, I call unpaid work. So a lot of things for the household. But as a result, his day off is Friday. And so one of our decisions about that time is that Friday morning time, we get our kids off to school. And then that's like our time. We have a Friday morning standing day date. That's our plan every week, is that time is time we're going to spend together. There might be, different things we'll do from time to time, where we're not spending all the time together, or we might be finishing up some work or something like that. But it's something we'll agree upon and say, okay, how are we going to talk? Or we'll talk about how do we want to spend our Friday time together this week. And it's so life-giving to know that there's going to be this one time in the week when it's just kind of peaceful and it's calm. We get a slow start, read for a long time, and just enjoy that slower pace together. But that's been a great rhythm of a time boundary that we've shared.
I think that's so good because in working with pastors over the years, I think that's a challenge sometimes because Sunday and even for some people, even Saturday, Sunday, there's some people that do Saturday evening service and then they do Sunday. And so I think you have to be intentional about that. And I think you are the one that can make adjustments because your schedule, didn't include, Friday was a regular day for you.
Right.
And
right.
so for that to become your own Sabbath, in a way, it takes being intentional about it, doesn't it? I mean, it's like, because I think some people, I guess why I brought it up, I think some couples that are in that situation have difficulty making that happen, at least making it happen consistently.
Yes, it is hard. It does take a lot of intentionality. And we even talk about, like, there are certain activities we will not do on a Friday. So for example, maybe we need to get groceries. We're going to get those on Thursday because going into the grocery store is not part of that. It just takes us out of that zone as much as possible. We're not rigid about it, but
you're not going to let your family starve, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, we have the ability. We can plan ahead. And so we get excited about it. We'll plan ahead. What do we want to eat? We'll get that ready. We do not want to be, spending tons of time in traffic, driving all over town. We just make the choices about what's life-giving and restful to us together. And then we try to honor that. And it does take intentionality, forethought, planning ahead. But then the reward is worth it because you're not going to get that time if you don't plan for it.
Absolutely. I think it's so good. And I think it's so important for all of us, but I think especially when you're in ministry, because there's always somebody that wants your attention. There's always somebody. And so if you don't draw those boundaries, and even when you do, people may have kind of trampled over that on Friday mornings for you guys for a while until you established and people realize, okay, that's off limits.
Yeah.
Yes. An big emergency, it's off limits.
Yeah. And to just whatever it is, it'll still be there on Saturday or on Sunday. It will still be there. So
exactly.
Nothing's getting neglected in the process. But another one that we have along the same lines is we've decided to reevaluate how I interact with church functions. For a long time, because we're in a smaller church, I would just assume anytime Brian's there, I need to be there too to help out. I don't really think anybody put that expectation on me necessarily, but it's just something I felt like I should be helping. And we finally had to say, he said, you do not have to be there. Like, you don't feel obligated. You don't need to go to everything, even really good things. It can just be too much. So that was a really helpful thing for us. And that one was harder with people's expectations because people love to make little comments and jokes that aren't funny and stuff like that. And it's something I just had to be prepared for and to answer graciously and not get snarky back.
Yeah, because people, for some reason, they get these unrealistic expectations or ones they've never checked out, and then they get upset when you don't meet them. Just kind of we do sometimes in marriage.
Yeah. It's a growing process, but I have found that it takes a little work to shake it up at first, kind of like you with not doing the night meetings. But then once you get into the swing of it, I've wondered why didn't we do this sooner? That's so helpful.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And that's cool that you see the benefit of it, or setting that boundary, how that made a difference for you.
Yeah. And a lot of it is looking at what are the things in my life that no one else can do. And a lot of it in this season has to do with the fact that, our kids are at the ages they are, the stages they are. Nobody else can be their mom, but plenty of other people could help out with things at church.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's your number one job next to being
Yeah.
alive, next to
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll get those back.
What?
Cover all the bases there.
Yeah, totally. Lara, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Will you go and tell us a little bit about your spouse, your marriage, and then we'll go from there?
Yeah, so my name is Lara. My husband's name is Boone. We have been married for almost 3.5 years. It'll be 4 years in August, which is just so crazy. I feel like it has gone by so fast.
Mhm.
Every year goes by a little bit faster too, which is just wild. And we just had a daughter in June. Her name is Gray, and we are about to celebrate her first birthday, which is also just so surreal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I have been working with Awesome Marriage for I think 2 years now, which is
Wow.
just wild. Yeah.
Yeah, that is. That is.
I feel like my time is
Well,
just going by faster and faster every year. It's
oh
crazy.
my gosh. I believe it. Well, okay, so you've got a great perspective of some boundaries you're going to share with us today. Will you
Yeah.
tell us about a specific boundary that helped your marriage?
So, specifically for me, we are very close with our family, which can be both a good and a bad thing, I feel like. And
Mhm.
so for us, we have boundaries with our families, especially like our in-laws. My in-laws, Boone's in-laws, so our family. But yeah, so we had to set those boundaries. And we had to set those boundaries very early on in our marriage because which is it's so weird because we had dated for like 10 years before we got married and we never had any issues with not
Mhm.
really with our families, which is just kind of wild. And then the second we got married, I don't know why, but it was like a switch just flipped and everything changed.
Hmm.
And we were having just constant fights and we had to set some boundaries in place.
Wow. Okay. So that this is actually something we've talked about a lot over the course of this podcast series. So, how did you go about deciding what the boundary was to set and then doing that?
Yeah, so we don't fight a lot, Boone and I. We just have like little tips, but we were fighting like all the time. Every week we would have a new fight. And so we had to sit down and we had to have like that really hard like discussion of like what we were having fights about, what was like hurting my feelings, what was hurting his feelings, and like what was the cause of it. And
Hmm.
so it's so uncomfortable doing that just because like like you grow up with your family and then all of a sudden you have this new family, like you have this new spouse. And I was so comfortable with him and I felt safe with him and comfortable with him, but it was still just hard having that discussion.
Hmm.
And so yeah, we just had to sit down and we had to identify what exactly what was the issue, how we could fix it, and we put the boundary in place as good as we could.
Hmm. When you first had the conversation, did you both see it the same way, or did it take a while to kind of get on the same page?
I think I was having more of a difficult time than he was, and so I think that it took a little bit to get on the same page, but every time that we would have an issue, I would have to be like, "Okay, this is the issue. Do you see where I'm coming from?" And he would be like, "Yeah, I do see this." And so I
Hmm.
think that over time, when it just kept happening and I would keep pointing it out and calmly having a discussion with him about it, he would be like, "Okay, I see where you're coming from. Let's fix this. Let's do something about this." And so it did take a while. It took a long
Hmm.
while to kind of like identify and then actually put into place.
Hmm.
And I don't even know exactly how long it took, but I feel like it took maybe like 6 months to really like make a
Hmm.
really big change.
So trial and error going on there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So, what were some of the specifics that you settled on that were really helpful?
Like what do you mean? Like specific boundaries?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I have like lists and I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings by any means. But like we just agreed that anytime a family member tries to make plans with either one of us, so if Boone's mom calls him and if she wants to do something on Thursday night, if she wants to have dinner with us on Thursday night at 7 p.m., Boone is like, let me talk to my wife first. And so he
Mhm.
will talk to me when he gets home. He won't call me. We'll have that discussion at night, face to face. We'll be sitting down, usually having dinner. And he's like, hey, my mom wants to have dinner with us on Thursday at 7 p.m. Does that work with you and your schedule? And I either say, yes or no. And if it doesn't work, then we find another date that does work. And if it works, then we have dinner with her. So that was our biggest first and foremost. I feel like our
Mhm.
families both were just like kind of coming over a lot and just kind of like
Mhm.
inserting them into our lives without really us being like, we want to do this or we don't want to do this. And so that was our big first and foremost. Another boundary we did was like no purchasing us gifts or any kind of excessive gifts without asking us.
Mhm.
As much as we love, getting gifts from our families, it's just something that we had to both agree on. Like, hey, is this something that we want to purchase on our own later on? Or is this something that like, yeah, this would be a great gift to have right now? And I know that that might sound crazy, but it's just, getting something over and over again and you're not really prepared for it was just kind of, I don't know. It's weird. Not what we wanted. And another one, which lately we've been having the most, not issues with, but we've been having more fights about is our daughter. Both of our families are like, you're not doing this right. This is how you should be doing this. And we're like, listen, like, this is our daughter. Thank you so much for the advice that you're giving us, but we're going to do things how we want to do them. And that has been hard for us just more recently because she's so new. She's almost 9 months. And so we celebrated Boone's birthday on Monday, and Boone's mom was feeding my daughter chocolate cake. And I was like, oh my gosh, please don't, don't do that. And I don't want to be the one to tell her. I would prefer my husband tell his mom no. But he was also like, no, mom, please don't do that. And it's fine. There's nothing bad. We just didn't want her to have chocolate just that early, So just things like that.
Yeah. Those are so good because it's like, it is a lot of what Dr. Kim talks about, just making sure that what you and Boone agree on, you agree on together.
Yeah.
And then you get to make those plans together, because I'm hearing you say like, you want to do things with family. You love doing that, but you need to make those decisions with you two instead of having decisions made for you.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Those are great examples. So, okay, as you were going through the process, we kind of talked about how you identified what boundaries to set. How did you make those enforceable?
That's a good question. Honestly, it was just kind of like you said earlier, just kind of like that trial and error, just kind of like figuring out what works for us specifically and just kind of inserting that into our lives. So, we started with the phone calls, and he would be like, hey, can my mom come over on Thursday night for dinner? And if I was doing anything, my mind wouldn't be there. I wouldn't be having that like really like good discussion with him. And I could be like all over the place, cleaning up the house, taking care of Gray, changing her diaper. And I would agree to something without actually like realizing what I agreed to. So just kind of trial and error. And we decided that what was best for us is to be sitting down face to face, put our phones away, turn the TV off, have dinner with no distractions, and being present in that moment and saying yes or no to something. That for us was huge. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. I'm just making me think of like a time this week where my daughter said she'd do something and she's like, I never said that, but it's probably because we were like in passing talking about it. It's very real. And then, so how do you feel like once you have implemented those boundaries, has it helped the fighting and the tension? How's it changed both you and Boone's relationship and relationships with your families?
I think that has honestly been really good for both of us. I think that for Boone and I's marriage and relationship, it's been great. We like I said earlier, we have never like really fought a lot. There's not like, we don't fight a lot. We may have like a few like tiffs or some issues every once in a while, but we really don't fight anymore. That was the main cause of most of our fights. And so our fighting has definitely like decreased in an insane amount. And we've really, I feel like we've learned to respect each other and in our boundaries for, just ourselves and also for our marriage. So I think it's been good for us. And then our family, I think it was a little harder for our family to adjust just because, they didn't really see why we needed those boundaries. So for our family, it was a little bit more difficult. And I think that it was hard for them to accept, but once they did accept it, they were like, okay, I kind of see where you're coming from, and it's hard. You're starting a new family and it's hard and it's difficult, but it's definitely worth doing. I will say it's definitely worth it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that's good. And it's always hard when you're trying something new. It's going to take a little time here.
Yeah.
So do you feel like at this point, do your boundaries still need to be discussed or enforced, or is it just normal now?
I think that sometimes, yes. For the most part, I think that we know what we do want and what we don't want. But yeah, every once in a while, like the cake. I mean, it's not something that's really that big of a deal, But it is something that, like I discussed with him after. I was like, hey, I don't appreciate, your mom doing this. And he was like, absolutely, I wouldn't appreciate your mom doing it. And so we do like still have discussions about things like that. But for the most part, we're on the same page and we both know what we do and what we don't want. But I mean, it's family. I feel like there's going to be conflict. It's going to happen from time to time, especially when you're raising, a new little tiny human. You don't really know what you're doing and you want all of the help and all of the advice. But at the end of the day, you want to make those decisions together. So I think that it's just important just to be patient with each other and just to have so much communication, just open communication, and just to always be like willing to talk to your spouse about whatever issue or problem you're having.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good.
So thanks for joining us on the podcast. Will you go ahead and tell us your name, spouse's name, and how long you've been married?
I'm Brian Evans. My wife's name is Ashley. We've been married for 12 years. It's coming June. Been together for 19 years, but married for 12 years.
Awesome. And Brian, will you tell us your job role at Awesome Marriage as well?
I'm one of our social media coordinators. I handle Facebook, YouTube, replying to comments, posting, all that sort of thing.
Cool. So tell us about a specific boundary you set that helped your marriage.
One that I set fairly early on, working from home, it's easy to like, your work is here. So one that became necessary for us is for me to have a set time where, okay, that's the end of my work day. Mm-hmm. And we set, usually Ashley gets home at 5:30. So if I'm done with my work by 5:30, then that's a good time for us to kind of break from that, or for me to break from that. Because I worked in a warehouse 12 years before that. So when you leave work, you're done with work. Like you're gone from work. But when your work is here at home, then it can be easy to just keep working into the night. So that's one boundary we established fairly early, to make sure we didn't have any issues try to creep in.
Mm-hmm. So how did you know that boundary needed to be set?
Well, it became pretty clear early on. One of my goals was I'd heard friends who work from home that they had, I felt like they worked all the time and that sort of thing. But there was 1 week where I think two or three different days I was working well into 6:30, 7 o'clock. Actually start cooking supper, and then she come in here and say, "Are you done yet?" In a very loving, gentle way. She wasn't like being rude or anything like that, but that kind of opened my eyes. Like, I need to make sure I set a boundary. Like I can't do this. Like we need to have our family time.
Yeah, totally. So how is that boundary enforced?
I have an alarm set at 5:30. Alarm goes off. I quit whatever I'm doing. If she's not home yet, I may run a couple minutes later. But if she gets home and I'm still working, she says, "Hey, what are you doing?" So, so I know that's time for me to get off and spend time with her and work and wait till tomorrow. It'll still be here tomorrow.
Oh, absolutely. That's awesome. I love that's a really like gentle enforcement. That's nice.
Yeah, she does a great job of that. She's never like harsh about it. She's never like yelling at me like, "Why are you still working?" It's like, "Hey, like,
yeah,
are you done yet?" Like, just a very like easygoing thing. One thing I love about her, she's very like gentle in her responses like that.
Oh, well, that helps.
Yeah.
So how has setting this boundary helped your relationship and your family as well?
For one, first it's helped me in helping regulate a better like work-life balance, where I don't feel like I have to work all the time. It's like, even though my desk is here at home and my work is here at home, like my office is closed at 5:30. And it's helped us as a family out because work's not creeping into our family time, because that time is precious and limited in the evening time before the kids go to bed and all those things. So it's really helped us have more closeness. We able to do more things with our girls. And then it gives us, Ashley and I, more time together as well.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. So do you feel like the boundary still needs to be enforced, or has it just become normal now?
It's pretty much become normal. Every now and then I'll be working on something. I'll be hard into it and trying to get done. And she'll come home and she gives her, "Hey, what's going on?" And so like, very rarely now though, we both pretty much have a rhythm with it. I'll see her car drive up outside, and it's like, if my alarm hasn't gone off, it's like, okay, it's time for me to get off and work and wait till tomorrow. It'll be here tomorrow.
So good. So good. Well, Tiff, I'm so glad that you could join us today to share on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, this is awesome. Will you start off by just telling us a little bit about your marriage and how long you've been married?
Well, I've been married for almost 15 years. In
Mhm.
May, we'll be celebrating our 15-year wedding anniversary. Look, we'll be celebrating our 15-year wedding anniversary in May. We met in college, so we are actually college sweethearts.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Mm.
We are too. It's so fun growing up together.
Yes.
So, will you go ahead and just tell us a little bit about the specific boundary that you set that helped your marriage?
Well, one of the boundaries that we set in our marriage early on is that keeping people out of our business,
Mm,
which means family or friends or anybody, just anybody, period. So, in the beginning of our marriage, we went through some ups and downs, and we learned that going to God first save a lot of headache and a lot of heartache.
mhm,
And so that's just something that we kept doing. Every time an issue comes, we'll go to God first, we'll go to each other, and we'll work it out that way. If he lead us to go to someone, it was his leading.
mm.
But we learned that whatever's going on with us, it stay between us, and we work through it together. And that's how we have always been.
Mm-hmm. So, before you set that, how did you decide and identify that you needed that boundary?
Really just looking at the people that we was around. We wasn't around a lot of people that was married. A lot of people were single at that time because we was fresh out of college,
Mhm,
and we really didn't have just the example of understanding what marriage entails and what marriage looked like. And so when we went through our struggles at the beginning, that's when we started really seeking God and getting his understanding of what marriage is, what is the role of a husband and a wife, what do a marriage look like from God perspective. And so, and once we got a hold to that knowledge, it was
mhm,
like, we're not going to let this go. And so,
mhm,
if anything that came up, we took it to him. It was like, God, what do we do about this situation? What do we do about X, Y, and Z? And that's just how we have always been. And it's funny because we talk about that. And I was like, a lot of people are able to make their own narratives about us because they don't know. Because if
mhm,
something was going on, you won't have an idea because we make sure that we keep it between us because we know that God will help us through
mhm. That's
it.
good.
Mhm.
That's really good. So, have you found, just to go off of that, have you found that there are times that God does lead you to someone else for help
Yes,
or advice? Mhm,
there has been a couple of times that he had led us to someone else, and they always goes back to the Bible. They
mm,
reference the Bible. It's biblical truth. It's not your
mhm,
own opinions, your own thoughts. It's like this is what I feel God is saying, and this is what the Word says. So,
mm. That's so good. Gosh, that's
mhm.
so good. Because I feel like so many of us have so many voices that want to speak into our marriage, but it's
Mhm.
hard to like cut all that off. But y'all did a great
Yeah.
job with that, it sounds like.
Yes.
How did you make this boundary enforceable?
um, It's just that because we went through some pretty tough things,
Mhm,
and it was a lot of things that no one else would have understood anyway.
mhm,
And so when we like discovered God' definition of marriage and knowing that He was the one that saved our marriage, because at the beginning of our marriage we deal with infidelity on my
mhm,
part.
mhm,
And so going through that, we wasn't around a whole lot of people who have walked through that or who would understand it coming from a small town in Mississippi. And so it was like, okay, God, this is what happened. I know what the Bible say. How do we move forward? How do I forgive myself?
mhm,
Although he forgave me, but how do I forgive myself? How do I accept his forgiveness and yours too,
mhm,
according to your word? And so it was a lot of things that we had to go through. And that was one of the foundation that helped us to understand that, hey, we take this to God first and we work through everything and we funnel everything through his word and how we should operate and move according to his word about our marriage.
mhm. And so, okay, I feel like this is going to be obvious, but how has the boundary helped your marriage?
Well, it had helped our marriage great. So,
Mhm,
I mean, it's just like it just comes natural to us. Like
mhm,
if something is going on or something has happened, we pray about it and we seek God. And so that's just
mhm.
something that we always do.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thanks
Mhm.
for sharing that example. That's
Yeah.
huge. I can see how much it's become a part of your marriage.
Mhm.
Are there any other things you'd want to share before we wrap up?
Um, no, they're just one of the biggest boundaries that we
Mm,
have. Another one that's probably not as intense, is maybe like, so when, because I work, we work from home and he work outside of the home, or if I'm out or at a grocery store or something like that. One thing that we do is when we walk into the house that we make sure that we are not on the phones. We're not
Mm,
talking to anybody. We coming in and we giving each other our full attention. We're acknowledging each other because we done been outside or doing whatever we had to do.
mhm,
And so when we come home, it's like we have each other undivided attention right when we come in. And so
mhm.
we don't walk in talking on the phone or anything like that.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love that. That's so simple, but so
Mhm.
powerful.
Yes.
Oh, well, thanks so much for sharing those with us, Tiff. I appreciate it.
No problem. No problem.
So, Christina, thank you so much for sharing with us today. Will you tell us a little bit about how long you've been married and a specific boundary you set that helped your marriage?
Absolutely. I am happy to be here. So I'm Christina Dodson. I'm married to my husband Dylan, and we have been married for going on 12 years now, which is so fun. A specific boundary that we have, my husband is a pastor. And so one specific boundary that we have is for our calendar, we only have 2 ministry nights a week, always. And here's the kicker, because a lot of church folks might not think that this is legit or might kind of have a rub against this. But one of those ministry nights during community group season, so like Bible study, whatever you want, what small group season, whatever you want to call it, one of those counts for our regular community group. So during the seasons where we're having community group on a weekly basis, that really means we only have one other ministry night a week that we can commit to ministry things. And this includes having couples over to our house, having single people over to our home, to entertain them, to get to know them if they're new to the church. This includes counseling, people who want help and things like that, as well as just church events, fun things like trivia, all the way to important things having a worship night. And so that's really helped us just with our calendar. So that's a firm boundary that Dylan and I set about a couple of years ago. We've been in the church world for a long time, and we set it about 2 years ago, and it's been really life-giving for our marriage just to set those parameters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you get a big old yes and amen from this pastor's wife. I'm very pleased to hear about that boundary. So, how did you know that that was a boundary you needed to set?
Yeah, it was really as the church started growing. We planted New City Church about 6 years ago, and just the slowly but surely, things just started to creep up all the time. And it was hard too, because so many of the things that we would do felt fun too, right? These are things that we would choose to do even if we weren't a pastor and pastor's wife. Some of these things included things with our friends and things like that. And I'm not talking about a cookout, but it's maybe just the feeling of this feels like, even if it's 90% fun and 10% work, it's still work, versus we have friends in the church who it's 100% play, it's 100% fun. It's not work at all. But then you do have people in the church where it's no, this is a little bit of work and just energy and emotional energy that it takes from you. And so we really saw that really quickly. Our calendar was just filling up so much so quickly. There was one season there where we were doing premarital counseling with 3 different couples, and all of them could only meet in the evening. And it's why did we commit to doing this? And it was awful. It was so draining. We didn't have any restful nights. Our kids, got kicked to the sideline during that season, those poor children. And so we just, after doing that, we really saw this isn't good. Even though this is a good thing that we love to do and can be life-giving, too much of it is just, it takes a wear and tear on our marriage. And so we were disconnected. We weren't able to have date nights because there weren't enough nights in the calendar with everything else we had going on. And so Dylan really was the one to say, listen, there's always going to be something we could be doing for the church, and we're just going to have to say no to a lot of these things. And the hardest part about that for me was pushing up things out. So we still want to be approachable. And so we want people to say, hey, I need to talk to you about this thing. Hey, we need prayer. Hey, can you come over and pray over this thing with me, or whatever it may be? Or, hey, we need counsel, or, I have this big theological question. Can we go to dinner? We want to do things like that. But what was hard for me was saying, yeah, in 5 weeks we can get together with you, because it would just, it would fill up. But you had to do that sometimes in order to make sure you kept it to those 2 ministry nights a week. And that was really hard for me. And not every season does it look you're 3 to 5 weeks out, but sometimes it does. And that I felt bad and guilty for saying that to people, because it kind of came off we're busy. And my husband hates that word. It's his least favorite word, busy. It's a cuss word in our house, because we all have the same amount of time, right? We all have 24 hours in the the day. It's how you choose your time. And so we're real careful when we have to communicate that with people as well. We say, hey, like, this is what we need to do. And it's just because, we have to have some nights as a family is how we communicate. It's not that we're running ragged. It's not that we have something every other night, for the next 5 weeks. It's that, we have to protect our family. And we do have a few things on the calendar over the next month. And because we set this boundary, it does look like it's going to be 3 to 5 weeks before we could probably get together with you. And that was hard for me. But what I have found is people have been very gracious and understanding and appreciate that we're paying attention. We have 2 young kids that are home. They want to have dinner with us and have like normal evenings with us. And it's important that they do that. And so people have been more gracious and more understanding than I gave them credit for.
That's awesome. That's super encouraging. And what's really interesting is Dr. Kim just shared a boundary earlier in the episode that's almost identical. And It was about not doing things on multiple nights of the week and how he anticipated a lot of pushback and was kind of giving himself a hard time about what people might think, but nobody else gave that pushback. And so people are understanding, and that it's so encouraging to hear you don't have to be quote unquote busy, which I hate that word too very much, but you don't have to have a meeting on the calendar to have an important thing on the calendar. It's important enough to have your family time.
That's right.
And so that's a legitimate thing to schedule around. So I love that you're sharing that example. So how has this boundary helped your marriage and family as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, it's really helped us to not get burnt out because I felt like we were on the edge of that before we started to implement this boundary. And it's just helped us to be more restful because we're more restful, because we're able to do some things that really like fill our cup and also just like have a night to like do nothing, at times. And Bill and I are both extroverts, but man, even extroverts need a night to do nothing and to just spend time together. And then it's made it easier for us to have date nights. And so because of that, because we're investing more in our relationship, we enjoy, because we're more rested in general and we're spending more time together and are more connected, we enjoy each other more. And so our marriage is better, which I think makes the ministry better too, because, we're just able to pour out through the overflow of what's already going on in our life. And so I'd say all around it's best for everybody. It's best for our kids and for this church that we're leading and trying to shepherd. And I think as far as like how to make it enforceable, one thing that's been really helpful is a Google Calendar. And so this is how we do that, right? Like we have a Google Calendar, it's shared. I can see what's on his calendar. He can see what's on my calendar. And so it's really clear when you look at the week view, okay, well, is this a week that can fit one more thing? No, because it already has community group and one more thing. And so we're looking at the next week or the next week or the next week. And so that's really helped us to make sure we stick to this boundary. Because I think it would be really easy to be like, oh, well, it's just one time, or it's just one thing, or it's just, this sounds kind of fun. Like we can go ahead and put this on the calendar.
Yeah, for sure. Have you had that happen where you did kind of like squeeze something in there, and how'd that work out?
Yeah, every once in a great while we'll make an exception, but our thing about that is it can't become a pattern. So we certainly can't make 2 exceptions in a month. That's not okay. Or even in back-to-back months. It just wouldn't be right, because then all of a sudden it's like, why even have the boundary? If you're going to, every time you feel like you need to make an exception to the boundary, you're going to throw the boundary out the window. Like, why even have it to begin with? And so we rarely make exceptions to it. But when we do, we both have to agree to that exception. It's not like Dylan's going to make the call, hey, we're going to do this. No, we talk about it. And so we make sure that we're both good with that exception. And then we make sure we go back to the plan, go back to the standard. And then I always try to too, if it ends up being like that, because maybe, it was really hard to coordinate with someone else's schedule. It just wasn't lining up on a particular week or something. I try to make sure there's some overflow somewhere in the next couple of weeks where it's like, okay, well, let's cancel something else that we normally do to be more restful. Maybe it's a thing with family that we normally do on the weekend. Like we often go get breakfast with family members on Saturday morning, which is fun and life-giving and we enjoy it. But if we really need some downtime as a family, we can cancel that and have a restful Saturday morning instead of going out, which is fun. Pancakes are always a blast, but if you need to rest, you need to rest, and you can take a break from the pancakes for a day.
That's good. I like that. Like there's a appropriate amount of flexibility. It's not super rigid, but it also is purposed. So it's there for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as you've adopted this, as you've gone forward, has it become something that's now your new normal? Do you still have to talk about it a lot? How does that work?
Yeah, it has just become our new normal. So it's not something that we really have to talk about at all. I mean, sometimes we share about it with other people, like when we're putting them on our calendar, for instance. Mm-hmm. But apart from that, like for Dylan and I, it's not a conversation we normally have. It's just our new normal that keeps us connected. And it's been great.
That's awesome. That's super, super encouraging and practical. I love it. Are there any other boundaries that you guys have set that have helped you?
Yeah, we have. And so, boundaries are so interesting. I think there's a lot of general boundaries that would apply to a lot of people, right? And so, like boundaries with the opposite sex and things like that. So, we have lots of boundaries that look like that I would say like are probably good blanket statements for most couples, like, 99.9% of couples. But then I really do think some boundaries get really specific and unique to the couple. And so, one example of a very unique boundary that we have is we can't say must be nice to each other. And there's a story of why that is a thing. But when I first became a stay-at-home mom, where I was working part-time from home, but also staying home with the children, our lives all of a sudden looked really, really different. He was working at Verizon. He had weird long hours, but he also got to get out of the house every day and was with, people he enjoyed and got to eat out for lunch a lot because Verizon would pay for lunch for them and things like that. And I was at home with a baby and got to do fun things like go to the park and have fun, but I was also waking up 3 times in the middle of the night to feed a baby. And so our lives looked really different. And in those first couple of months of having a newborn, we started to say things to each other. Like he would share about his day and I'd be like, must be nice, lunch was catered again. Must be nice. I had to make lunch for Finley and I, but vice versa. He would say the same thing. I'd be like, it was a beautiful day. We went on a walk in the stroller, and he was like, must be nice. I was trapped inside all day, selling phones to customers. And so it really became this thing where it felt really competitive and negative and just became a thing where we weren't enjoying we weren't content in our own season because we were spending so much time comparing, and we weren't being happy for the other person in the joys that they had in that current season. And so it felt like everything had to be even, and that's just not how life works, right? And we're a team. So we were really not operating like a team by saying this unhelpful phrase, must be nice, must be nice. And so I think for some couples, they could say that playfully and it would not have a negative impact on their marriage. But for us, it was having a very negative impact on our marriage. It was affecting the way we thought about each other. We were very jealous about each other's season. And again, really feeding that discontentment. And so we had to set a boundary where we don't say that anymore. And so we set that boundary and we just kind of took it off the table. It's kind of like the word divorce in our house. It's not a thing we would say or play around with. And so that has really helped us just to enjoy the season that we're in more, but also be happy for our spouse in the joys that they have in their current season as well.
Oh, that's so good. I love that example.
Yeah.
Because it's true. Some of them are very, very personal in that way. And that doesn't make it any less important. It sounds like that's done a lot for y'all.
Yeah, definitely. And then another boundary that we have that I think could be fairly unique to certain couples, but might be a good blanket one for all couples is another boundary we have is that if either one of us thinks we need marriage counseling, we go. And so it's not like hey, I think we need marriage counseling. Let's talk about it. It's if one of us says, hey, we need to go to marriage counseling. It's like, okay, when? It's not like if, it's when. And so, and the reason we set that boundary is we just think marriage counseling is so important and that you shouldn't go always in an emergency state if it's just something small that you want to work on. And so we always make room for counseling in the budget and in the calendar. If one of us asks for it, we make sure to go because we're committed to our marriage and we want to make sure that we both feel good about that. And if one of us is saying something along the lines of we need help, well, we need to honor that. And so we don't argue about it. We just do it.
Yeah, that's so good. And I love too that it's not like emergency. It's not even punitive. It's just, this is a helpful thing. Let's make this happen.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's good. Do you have any others you want to share with us? There's that.
Yeah, I think one really random example that has really helped me, because boundaries were hard for me to understand as someone who's a people pleaser and who loves to serve and who's a helper. Boundaries have always been a hard thing for me to wrap my mind around. And so one example, I had a friend who was working through something with her husband where he just wasn't doing what he said he was going to do. And so they were working on a house project and they were redoing the floors. So taking out carpet and putting in hardwood floors in their home. And it was just a hard situation where months had gone by and the project was halfway done and it was totally chaotic. And he kept saying, I'm going to finish this weekend. I'm going to finish this weekend. I just need one more day. I just need one more day. And meanwhile, their house is in total chaos. You can't walk in certain areas of the home. It was completely unfunctional. And this went on for 6 months where every weekend he said he would do it, but then none of it would get done. It wasn't, and they had all the supplies. It was just a matter of stop watching TV and do the project. And so it was really frustrating. And so she actually talked to a marriage counselor about it, and it was really helpful. The marriage counselor encouraged her that you can't control what he's going to do, right? But like a reasonable boundary in that situation would be to say, well, I'm going to pay somebody else to do this. And to like give a deadline, give a reasonable deadline. But like if they really truly have the money to like have a contractor come in and do this, like if a project was supposed to be done in 1 month and all of a sudden it's taking 7 months and your whole life is chaotic because of it, and it's just because they're not taking action, like it's a reasonable thing to say, okay, well, if it's not done in the next 3 weeks, like I am going to pay a contractor to do it. And so she didn't end up taking that advice, but I thought that was such a practical example of like, oh, this does make sense. And like, say it kindly, say it with like grace. But, and that's another just like great situation where she, like that is something she can control. It was, she contributed to the finances. It was their money, like all married couples, whether you have an income producing work or not, it's always our money, right? So she does have a say in what they do with their money. And because he wasn't following through with something very reasonable, it's not unreasonable to say, well, I'm not going to continue to not be able to walk on my floors. It's been 6 months. And so I'm going to pay a contractor. And so I think that's a really weird example, but to me, I think people can get creative like that instead of, I think when we start to get in these holding patterns with our spouse where we're really frustrated about something and it's eating at us and it's consuming our whole lives, it can feel like you're stuck and there's no options. But I think sometimes we just got to take a step back, which is why going to see a counselor is really helpful, because that's what this counselor did for her, is like took a step back on the outside looking in. He said, well, here's one really simple thing you could do. And it was reasonable. And so I think you can get more creative with the solutions. And again, recognizing that like, this is something that she could do. She can't make him do it physically. And so that wouldn't be reasonable, but she can pay someone to get the floors done and get what she needs there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great example. That's really good. Yeah. And I think it's probably less weird than you think. I think there's a lot of people who have things like that going on in their house that they feel totally out of control.
Yeah, definitely. And I think in those situations, it can be helpful to like talk through with a trusted Christian friend or a counselor, because we can all be unreasonable sometimes. And so having that kind of like third party voice speak into it and getting that wise counsel, I think is needed in situations like that, to say like, wait, am I being reasonable? Because I think that's where she was at too, was just like, well, I can't pay somebody else. That wouldn't be reasonable. But it's like, well, it's been 6 months. So actually like, this is very reasonable. And to have somebody else say that was, I think the advice that she needed in that season.
Yeah, I can see that too, because the frustration, once the frustration takes hold, you can't sometimes tell if you're thinking clearly. And
Absolutely.
So having a third party can really help.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good one. Do you have any other examples up your sleeve?
No, I think those are the big ones. But I think having boundaries as a married couple is just so important. And it's not a punishment. It's about protecting what's really important and making sure that you're both having a thriving, awesome marriage. And so getting on the same page about these things, speaking about them kindly, and communicating them in a gracious way. But a boundary can give you a lot of freedom. And so I'm a big fan of boundaries. It took me a while to get there, but now I'm a fan.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing those. That's helpful.
Thanks for letting me join the podcast for the day.
We pray that this series has been helpful for your marriage, and I'm so thankful we could share those stories from our team today. We pray that you're finding ways to implement marriage boundaries to help your relationships and your marriage be healthier. So next week, we're going to finish up this series with a Q&A to answer listener questions. And we have some really good ones waiting for Dr. Kim's wisdom. So if you want to grab that new boundaries workbook that we mentioned at the top of the episode, find that at awesomemarriage.com or by using the link in today's show notes wherever you're listening. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. Have a great day and do something awesome for your marriage today.